In a world where people feel they've seen it all, how far should investigative journalists go to get your attention? The Investigators starts now.
Our app that's free to download. You willing to try it out?
Yeah, sure.
We've hijacked their phones with total access to their private lives.
It makes you feel violated.
We didn't want to invade people's privacy. That wasn't the objective. You have to sometimes show someone, because if you tell them, it's, yeah, I get it.
First responders can barely keep up with the overdoses.
What the hell is the news crew doing here?
When you overdose, your heart stops. It's not my job to sanitize that when there's 755 people dead so far.
I'm Diana Swain. We're the Investigators. This is what we do. I need to get your attention. As a journalist, whether I'm writing for online or television, I'm competing against all that clutter out there to try to get you to look at my story. And often that means journalists have to figure out just how far to push to get you to take notice.
You're a part of an exclusive group that's going to get a sneak peek at our daily horoscope app.
CBC's investigative program Marketplace asked passers-by if they'd be interested in trying out a new app on their Android phones.
Sure, I could do that.
When I read those terms and conditions.
You didn't even read them.
I did.
Did you?
My, reading skills are
That was like speed reading.
What participants don't know is that this is, in fact, a journalistic experiment about privacy. And those licensing conditions that people didn't really read actually gave CBC unfettered access to their phone. That's text, the camera, even the microphone.
They have no clue right now that we're doing this. Wow. Yeah, that's our tester.
Shocked by how easy it was for CBC journalists to gain that access? Well, that's what the experiment aimed to demonstrate. Many popular apps come with those same sweeping terms and conditions.
Text messages, we had access to that.
Everything? Oh my.
You needed a lab coat. Did you end up finding one?
Yeah.
Fast forward to the big reveal.
You guys could have taken pictures at the wrong time. Could have listened to conversations that were private.
But not everyone thinks this experiment was fair play.
You basically broke my privacy just like the app did.
We accepted our terms, that's the thing.
Yeah, but we all accept terms and conditions, but it doesn't get displayed on TV.
So, did the journalists go too far to illustrate the point? All right, Nalisha, you're the perfect person to answer these questions. You produced this item, and there were lots of ethical challenges. I can see that in watching this. So let's start, first of all, with what is it you wanted to achieve with this story?
So we all live in this app-obsessed world. We carry our phones like we're married to them, and we don't really realize how much information we're giving away to companies when we download smartphone apps. And when we started researching this story, we thought, okay, people just need to know this. And what better way than to illustrate it? So we used some of the big popular apps as our guide, the similar permissions they use, and we created our own horoscope app. And on the streets of Toronto, we asked people to download it. And those terms and conditions, they pressed, yeah, sure, like people do, not realizing what they had just signed away. Well, yeah, exactly. We asked, just about 8 to 10 people to download the app, and the majority of them just scrolled through and clicked accept and install. A couple of people skimmed through it and said, hold on, give me a second, but no one took longer than a minute. And I mean, our terms and conditions laid out exactly what we had access to. In bullet point form, we said, we'll be able to read your call logs, read your text messages, access a lot on your phone, track your location. But no one took the time to read through that. And so you got it to that point, and you could have just said to people, hey, look what you just agreed to. But to illustrate the point, you go further, which was pretty interesting, including accessing someone's phone when they didn't know you were doing that. So let's just take a look at that moment.
We had the ability to own your phone. How are you feeling about that?
I need to do a better job than skimming. Because I know that I did take a moment to look for keywords, and I just obviously didn't do quite a good enough job. Okay, so my first thought was, okay, if you just go into someone's phone, they could be in the bathroom, they could be in bed, they could be in a change room, they could be in any
number of really personal moments. How did you manage that?
So obviously we had a lot of team discussions. We didn't want to invade people's privacy. That wasn't the objective. We didn't sit there for days going through people's personal data. We just looked just a little bit, just to prove our point. We looked at a few text messages, we looked at a few call logs. But really the point, Diana, was not people's data. It wasn't, what is X, Y, and Z doing on Monday afternoon? It was the access they were giving us. So I think, big picture, that was the point we were trying to make. I mean, thankfully, we didn't find anything that would have made them feel inappropriate or uncomfortable. Nothing. And if we would have found it, journalistically, legally, ethically, we wouldn't have aired it. Because again, that wasn't the point.
Okay, but you did use some personal information on the air, some of what you found. So let's just take one of those examples.
You gave us permission to look at your call logs. Does this look familiar to you?
It does.
I noticed that there's someone you message all the time called Snoop Dodd.
Yeah. It's kind of creepy.
It is, right? Because that's his buddy. He doesn't expect everybody to be knowing he's talking to Snoop Dogg.
Right.
I mean, that is personal information that's now out there.
Right. So it is personal information, but honestly, I feel like we erred on the conservative side. Yeah, we found out that Snoop Dogg was in fact this tester's best friend.
Okay.
But for the most part, I mean, if you actually watch the story, we use wide shots. We don't really hone in on people's personal data. We blurred, contacts, phone numbers, text messages. It was really the exchange between the host and the tester to say, hey, we know, but the viewers at home won't get that personal information.
Okay, and we know that not everybody loved this experiment.
No, not everybody did. But, at the end of the day, big picture, what we were trying to prove was, I do it, you might do it, a lot of people do it. We click install, we download these apps, we don't really know what permissions we're giving up. And once we explained to these testers what the bigger objective was, it was really an educational, eye-opening experience for them.
Not
we
just
showed
say
them.
it, but show them, right?
We showed them. And I think that's the thing. You have to sometimes show someone. Because if you tell them, it's, yeah, I get it. But when you show them, they really start to understand. So it was a really eye-opening experience for them.
Very quick, what if you had found something? What if you'd gone into their phone and in that moment you actually see them in the commission of a crime?
I'm sure if we would have found anything like that, just for different conversations would have been had, different considerations would have been made.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
If the prospect of someone secretly accessing your phone's camera or microphone has you wanting to throw your phone out right now, hang on a second. This is the Consumer Electronics Show that's been on this week in Las Vegas. Along with the latest in robots and entertainment systems, an entire industry is springing up now that's aimed at giving you back some personal power. That's something CBC's senior technology writer Matthew Braga has been looking into. How is the industry showing that it's taking seriously the privacy rights of consumers?
Well, so naturally, you talk to a lot of these companies, especially companies that are creating sort of smart connected home devices. So, internet connected cameras, dishwashers, even shower heads, right? And, everyone, of course, is going to talk about how their devices are secure, they respect privacy and that sort of stuff. And, it was kind of interesting to kind of hear sort of what everyone was kind of, thinking in terms of sort of their protections, right? I mean, I had some camera companies that said that their approach to privacy is, literally building mechanical shutters, right, on their cameras so that, someone can't, remotely turn a camera on in software. Or, I had other companies saying, okay, we collect all this data from your home, but we actually store it locally. We don't put it up into the cloud. And so, it's kind of hard to sort of, test all these claims out just, in talking to people at the show. But the fact that people are kind of talking about this and being really open about sort of, code reviews of their software and security audits and things like, penetration testing to see, can attackers get into, the devices and get people's data out and take control and all that sort of stuff. People are definitely willing to talk about it. And so I hope that kind of shows that the industry is maybe moving into a direction that is taking these sorts of issues a little bit more proactively, perhaps, than they were in the past.
And do you think that they recognize that consumers, like me, are getting a little antsy about just the level of encroachment now?
I hope so. I mean, an example that I was, using yesterday when talking with someone is, you have your phone now and you can, look at a privacy settings page, right? It shows every app that's using your location, access to your photos, et cetera, et cetera. But, as the number of devices, I think, that have access to our information, as the number of devices that are connected to the internet and gathering data and sort of just collecting information about ourselves increases, I almost wonder whether there's going to have to be at some point, like, a dashboard for the home, right, that shows, oh, my thermostat is using my location on this day, or, my dishwasher is connecting to the internet here, or, something that kind of gives consumers a little bit more of a sense of how are all of these new technologies, basically using our data and sharing our data and storing it in ways that I don't think people fully grasp yet.
That's going to be interesting to watch for. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, Diana.
How do journalists weigh the right to privacy with the need to show a public health disaster? We'll take you to the front lines of Canada's opioid crisis. Plus, hackers are targeting victims through fake news stories. Just one of the 5 things we learned from investigative journalism this week. Our roundup is next. But first,
on time and on budget.
Washington is getting ready for Donald Trump's inauguration, and journalists are scrambling to figure out who'll be headlining the presidential party.
It remains doubtful that we're going to see musical performances of the, shall we say, caliber that the self-described billionaire would consider big league.
Singers Andrea Bocelli, Gene Simmons, Celine Dion, and Elton John have also declined.
So why is this news?
Beyonce, James Taylor, Brad Paisley. Those are just a few of the A-list entertainers who sang at President Obama's last inauguration.
Right. So how does Donald Trump feel about getting the cold shoulder from the hot list?
The president-elect displaying his disdain on Twitter, saying the so-called A-list celebrities are all wanting tickets to the inauguration, but look what they did for Hillary. Nothing. I want the people.
Fair enough. No celebrities at this inauguration then, just regular people. Unless, of course, what you actually mean is that your team is still trying to get a headliner.
So I understand you're trying to get either Justin Timberlake or Bruno Mars to perform at the inauguration, right?
Yes. They can call me, by the way.
What's that?
Call me.
Here are 5 things we learned this week from investigative journalists. CBC News learns that military police are investigating after a smartphone was found hidden inside a women's change room at a DND facility in Toronto. One of France's most popular newspaper chains says it won't commission opinion polls as part of its coverage of this year's presidential election. Le Parisien will instead focus on investigative journalism. The Panama Papers, which revealed how many rich and powerful people hide their money, have led to criminal investigations now against more than 6,000 people and companies. That's according to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The U.S. government believes Russian hackers are using fake news articles as clickbait to hack into servers. That's according to documents reviewed by the Daily Beast. And CBC News learns that many pharmacies in the city of Ottawa aren't carrying naloxone kits used to counter the effects of fentanyl overdoses. That's in spite of recommendations from health officials. And that fentanyl crisis is where we're headed next. Investigative journalists often come up against issues of consent and privacy in their work, balancing the public's need to know with anyone's right to privacy. And finding that line can be tricky.
First responders can barely keep up with the overdoses. Our cameras tagged along with them for a day.
CBC's Natalie Clancy has been reporting on the devastating effects of fentanyl on people on Vancouver's downtown east side for months. She's shown the toll the drug takes on its users and the city's first responders as they try to deal with multiplying overdoses.
Yesterday we had someone come back 7 times in one day. It can get overwhelming. It can get to the point where you're just like, why are we doing this? This is getting too much.
Opioids like fentanyl can essentially turn users into zombies, making them totally unresponsive and unaware of their surroundings, like this woman.
She's oblivious to her soiled shorts, the blood dripping down her leg.
She's also oblivious to the news camera, which raises a key question. She is in no shape to give consent, so does showing the footage exploit her?
What the hell is the news crew doing here?
Hey, out, man. Hey, come on. Out.
Or does it get people's attention by showing the audience what a spiraling drug crisis in their own city really looks like? So, Natalie, in some of your footage, we've seen a man who's unconscious. He's face down on the sidewalk. He can't give consent. The woman we just talked about, obviously no condition to give her consent. So tell me about the decision to go ahead and use their images.
Well, I would argue these people are in a public place in the middle of a public health crisis. And if you look closely, you can't search them on the internet. You can't say, oh, that was so-and-so, because their faces are blurred. And to me, that is the line of protecting patient confidentiality in the context of a public health crisis, where when we began reporting on this in January, experts were telling us earlier in the year that it's going to be like 3 jumbo jets crashing. 800 people are going to die if the government doesn't do more, if people don't do more. And in fact, sadly, that's right where we are by the end of the year. So we continue, as based on that story, we were able to still get access to the emergency room. And even later, after 4 times saying no, BC ambulance paramedics finally let us go on a ride along with them. And that story is coming up. And we continue to strike this balance of reporting on a public health crisis by showing what happens. And I can tell you, some of our stories have been shown in high schools. And it's not pretty. When you overdose, your heart stops. And sometimes we've seen patients soil themselves. It's not my job to sanitize that when there's 755 people dead so far, just as of the end of November, Diana.
And it's often a tough call that we see things, we get footage, and we have to decide whether it's fair and reasonable to show this. You know, whether that's a bombing in a marketplace, something in a war zone, or something like this. I mean, have you made decisions to not show something, even though it would have been very compelling?
Well, what we've had to do is make decisions to stop filming, because when you're out in the street in this community, people have yelled at us and screamed at us and threatened us, even when we've been with first responders, because imagine what we look like. I'm carrying a big still camera. I'm with a videographer. And it appears as though we're filming people dying. It looks very voyeuristic. And when people don't understand, at one point we were outside a clinic when a man who looked like an investment banker to me had come from the gym and overdosed. They were screaming at us, this clinic, this community center. Well, later, once I explained that we were building a database and doing a series and holding the government accountable for a failed promise to build addiction beds in the province, they ended up cooperating. They ended up allowing us to use the footage inside, and they ended up being a key part of the journalism we did. So when people realize you're actually doing a public interest health story and you're not there trying to get sensational photos and breach people's privacy, it does make a difference. But these are not easy stories to tell. And having sat on more than a dozen couches of family members who've lost a loved one, it's an important story to tell, and it's not over, far from over.
And not over at the end of your workday either, right? You take this stuff home, and it's tough to shake off the things that you've seen.
Oh, I have 13-year-old twins. They're so sick of the lectures of don't do drugs. You know, you panic. At one point, I was looking at moving to another suburb of Vancouver, and that day there were 9 overdoses in 20 minutes in that community. So you can't get away from it. And I think about all the mothers I've met who are grieving, and the idea that the one thing you should never do, and we know this, don't read the comments, but people comment and say, what a waste of time. Why is she wasting her time on this story? You know, these people are choosing to take this drug and they deserve to die. And so that's difficult to see when every addict and expert I've talked to says, when you're in the grips of an opioid addiction, choice really isn't an issue anymore. It's an opioid disorder, and what other disease are we treating in church basements, for example, and not putting as much effort and money into addiction? And experts have told us that our work has, in fact, forced the government to spend more money, because when they first declared the health emergency, they'd only dedicated $5 million, and now they're up to over $40 million spending trying to curb what's been, as we say, and who wants to be right. You know, journalists are often accused of overblowing things and fear-mongering, and I wouldn't like to be wrong on this one, but we said it was going to be 800 deaths, and here we are.
Hard to watch, but important to see. Thanks, Natalie.
You're welcome.
Natalie Clancy was talking about the challenges for journalists covering people in distress, such as someone in a drug overdose. But it can also be tricky for journalists who are covering a disaster, for instance. And one viewer picked up on that with this week's Ask Me Anything about investigative journalism. Their question: how do journalists handle the impulse to help people in need without becoming part of the story? Well, Washington correspondent Paul Hunter has certainly experienced that, covering the disaster in Haiti, for instance, after the earthquake. So we put the question to him.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And the truth is, it's hard. I mean, my answer is that you do your job, right? You tell the story of what you're seeing about those people in need, wherever it is. In Haiti, we did that. And I know what happened with the journalism that we did. I know that the COO of Air Canada, as it turns out, was watching our story one night in a hotel room, saw the circumstance at a medical clinic that had run out of supplies, desperately needed stuff, arranged for a flight from Canada for aid to come down and help people. And it changed his life. He's gone on to be engaged in an orphanage in Haiti and has helped countless others. But to answer the question, we helped the people in front of us by doing what we do, by telling their story to people who can help. And that's how we helped. And it was gratifying. We did our job.
Got a story tip for the investigators? Share it anonymously at securedrop.cbc.ca. You can also contact us through email, that's investigators@cbc.ca, or just say hi on Twitter @SwainDiana. I got a protective case for my phone for Christmas. I have been known on occasion to carelessly throw my phone into my purse or on my desk and crack the screen. But I never really thought I was careless about my privacy. After seeing this marketplace story, I realized that I have been. I had stopped worrying a long time ago about sharing my address or email on websites. I reasoned it was just so easy to get that information nowadays anyway that it was pointless to worry about it. Then I saw how easily hackers were able to add another person's name to someone's account with the scantest of information.
So I'm wondering if I can get my fiance added to the account. Thank you, thank you.
I knew that my camera or microphone could be activated remotely because late last year, journalist Patrick Lagacé learned that Montreal police had gotten a warrant to secretly access his phone. But I foolishly reasoned that they had to get a warrant. Pretty tough, right? Well, this week, unsealed police documents show it wasn't that hard at all, even though Lagacé, it turns out, had virtually nothing to do with their investigation. And now we've learned that virtually anyone who creates an app could be listening in or looking in on our most private moments.
We also had access to your camera phone.
What? For me, that experiment showed the tough choices the journalists have to make all the time about how far to go to illustrate a problem. But they got my attention. I'm Diana Swain. We're the Investigators.